Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I also thank you and all of the House of Commons staff for everything you've done to keep Parliament open and safe? Can I wish the Prime Minister that the Chequers won well in his isolation? With 500,000 people self-isolating, I think we're all a bit surprised that the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Cabinet Office Minister were all randomly chosen for a get-out-of-isolation-free card. But it's good that the Prime Minister finally recused himself, even if it took a public outcry for the Communities Secretary to be humiliated on live TV and a trip to a country estate. Mr Speaker, if someone is pinged by the NHS app, as millions will be over coming weeks, should they isolate? Yes or no? Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister says that everyone understands the government's position as to what you should do if you're pinged by the NHS app. That's a very interesting answer, because the government's all over the place on this. Yesterday, his business minister said the app was an advisory tool only. Another government minister, and I kid you not, said yesterday the app is just to allow you to make informed decisions. What on earth does that mean? Allow you to make informed decisions. And of course, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor spent the weekend trying to dodge isolation altogether. So, Mr Speaker, the British people are trying to follow the rules. How can they, when his ministers keep making them up as they go along? Well, Mr Speaker, everything may be calm from the Prime Minister's country retreat, but back here, the truth is we're heading for a summer of chaos. There's a lot of noise, Mr Speaker, right? I hope they've all got their NHS app on. Mr Speaker, we're heading for a summer of chaos. 1 million children were out of school last week. 1 million. And a huge number of businesses are closing because so many staff are self-isolating. So let me turn to the question of exemptions. Yesterday, the messages coming out of Number 10 about which businesses and workers might be exempt from isolation changed hour by hour. First, yesterday, there was going to be a list, and then there wasn't. And then the Prime Minister's spokesperson said this, and I quote, "We are not seeking to draw lines specifically around who is or who is not exempt." Now, I've read that, and I've reread it several times, Mr Speaker. I haven't a clue what that means. The Road Haulage Association hit the nail on the head when they said this, and I quote, that it was thought up on the hoof without proper organisation or thought. Now, Mr Speaker, I know the Prime Minister likes to govern by three-word slogans. I think, Mr Speaker, I think on the hoof might work pretty well. So, last chance before recess. For millions of workers, this matters.
Order. Mr Gullis, I don't need any help or assistance from yourself. The next time you point to your watch, might be better looking at Big Ben outside rather than here. Come on, Keir Starmer.
So, Mr Speaker, last chance before recess. Can the Prime Minister just clear it up which workers and which businesses will be exempt from isolating before the 16th of August? He talks about inconsistency. 2 hours and 38 minutes to do a massive U-turn on Sunday morning. And then what have we seen in the last few days? He says I didn't listen to his answer. I did listen. I still think he's making it up. We had completely unclear announcement on Monday about exemptions, had contradictory statements all day yesterday. Now we seem to be back to the confused policy of Monday. How on earth are businesses meant to plan when the Prime Minister keeps chopping and changing like this? I have to say, even after 15 months of these exchanges, I can't believe that the Prime Minister doesn't see the irony of him spending Freedom Day locked in isolation and announcing plans for a vaccine ID card. I remember when he used to say he'd eat an ID card if he ever had to produce one, and now he's introducing them. So, Mr Speaker, when it comes to creating confusion, the Prime Minister is a super spreader. So let me try to get some clarity. Why is it okay? Why is it okay to go to a nightclub for the next 6 weeks without proof of a vaccine or a test, and then from September it will only be okay to get into a nightclub if you've got a vaccine ID card? Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister keeps asking me if I will support his chaos. No! And I want to bring the Prime Minister back to one of our earlier exchanges in this House. On the 26th of May, I asked the Prime Minister if he'd ever used the words COVID is only killing 80-year-olds, or words to that effect. On that day, the Prime Minister pointedly didn't deny using those words, and now we have the proof that he did. We've all now seen the Prime Minister's text message. I quote, "The median age for COVID fatalities is 82. That is above life expectancy." And we have the Prime Minister's conclusion in the same text. "So get COVID and live longer." Remind the Prime Minister, over 83,000 people aged 80 or over lost their lives to this virus. Everyone leaving behind a grieving family and loved ones. So will the Prime Minister now apologise for using those words? Speaker, I think we might need to check that the line to Chequers is working, because the Prime Minister's answers have no resemblance to the questions I'm actually asking him. He's given us a list of what he can't do. What he can do, quite straightforwardly, virtually or otherwise, is say sorry. The trouble is, Mr. Speaker, nobody believes a word the Prime Minister says anymore. He promised he had a plan for social care, but he's ducked it for 2 years. He promised not to raise tax. Now he's planning a jobs tax. He promised he wouldn't cut the army or the aid budget. He's cut both. And, Mr. Speaker, he also promised that Monday would be Freedom Day. He said 18 times from that dispatch box that it would be irreversible. But the truth is, he's let a new variant into the country, he's let cases soar, and he's left us with the highest death toll in Europe, one of the worst hit economies of any major economy. Last week, 1 million kids were off school, businesses are closing, and millions will spend their summer self-isolating. But don't worry, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's got it all under control. Because this morning we read he's got a new 3-word slogan. Keep life moving. You couldn't make it up. Mr. Speaker, isn't it clear there's only 3 words this Prime Minister needs to focus on? Get a grip.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you very much. Of course, while they're talking about levelling up on the government benches, we in Scotland are looking at settling up for the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, I hope the Prime Minister will be reflecting on the judgment from the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman yesterday that judged that there was maladministration in dealing with the 1950s WASPy women. It's about time that the government delivered justice for those involved. Mr. Speaker, last night we heard from the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff. On the 15th of October, the Prime Minister didn't believe that the NHS would be overwhelmed and thought that the over-80s should be sacrificed to the whims of the deadly virus. The Prime Minister wrote those words whilst our NHS was facing the darkest moments in its history. While doctors and nurses were fighting to contain the pandemic, the Prime Minister was actively pushing for the virus to be allowed to run rampant through towns and cities. The Prime Minister was willing, in his own words, to allow the bodies to be piled high. Mr. Speaker, on October the 15th, 2020, 60,000 people had already died. How can anyone have put faith and trust in a Prime Minister who actually typed the words, "Get COVID and live longer"? Is that it? Is that it, Prime Minister? Because, you know, the reality is that the Prime Minister wrote these words himself. The over-80s were expendable. A Prime Minister is charged with protecting society, not putting folk at risk of an early death. Such a glib attitude towards human life is indefensible. The Prime Minister is simply not fit for office. The clear pattern throughout this pandemic is that it's one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. The reality, Mr. Speaker, that the only way to get to the full truth over this UK government's disastrous handling of the pandemic is for this cabal to be made to answer under oath. So, will the Prime Minister confirm that in the interests of public health and confidence, that the COVID inquiry will begin immediately and commit to appearing at the inquiry himself under oath before any general election is called?